Hello everyone, my name is Ziad Ghazi. I'm an emergency physician and I'm here having coffee with Dr. Steve Carroll, who I was pleasantly surprised to find out that he actually has a lot of experience in making podcasts. And as I was preparing for this presentation at the Emirates Society of Emergency Medicine in Dubai, I asked for him to help me talk about podcasts to you today and learn more about how they are done, what they contain, and some of the issues and opportunities facing this creative educational tool. How are you, Stephen?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you for taking the time today. As I was preparing for my presentation, I was fascinated by all the literature that's already out there on this topic. So can you tell us a little bit about the steps in producing a podcast?
Sure. So I run the EM Basic podcast. You can find it on iTunes or also at embasic.org. And I've been doing it for about the past 5 years. I started when I was a senior resident in emergency medicine. And really, to start a podcast, you don't really need a lot of equipment or a lot of money. I mean, the first thing you need is you're going to need an idea. You're going to need an idea about what you want to talk about. So I chose to talk about emergency medicine core content. I was a senior resident and I was responsible for teaching the interns and the medical students emergency medicine core content, so I decided that's what I wanted to do. I mean, the first thing you need, obviously, is some sort of computer, but you don't need the top-of-the-line fanciest thing out there. Any desktop or laptop will do. And then next thing you'll need is a microphone. You can certainly get some headset mics for about $20 US. The microphone I use and we're using right now is called the Blue Yeti. It's YETI. You can get that for about $100 US on Amazon. You could spend thousands of dollars if you want to, but you really don't have to. And then the third and fourth things you'll need is some website to host your podcast and probably host a blog along with it. So let's say you're doing a podcast. You're going to need a web host, place where you can upload your podcasts and then distribute them to others. And the way that most people distribute them is through iTunes. Any iPhone can get to it. Pretty much any mobile device can get to iTunes, and that's where the vast majority of podcasts are. And then if you do a podcast, you'll probably want a website to go to, like, for example, embasic.org, where you can publish the episodes and then also have a place that you can put show notes, references for whatever you're talking about. So that's kind of the basics of it, and I was able to teach myself how to do this, and I'm no tech wizard. So it's definitely something that pretty much anyone can do. The biggest thing is just the time commitment to do it. It's going to take you a lot longer than you think to do this. It's not a lot of cost. I mean, you can run a podcast for $20 a month with the web hosting fees. Really, it's kind of the time costs that are the most significant.
Thank you. Now, how do these thousands of subscribers select from the number of podcasts providers available, and what drives listeners to pursue this technology and this educational tool?
Well, first of all, I think most people get their podcasts through iTunes, the Apple website, the Apple service. And iTunes doesn't actually store these podcasts, they just kind of point you in the right direction. So if you go to the iTunes thing under medicine, you're going to find lots of medicine podcasts, and you'll see that emergency medicine is very well represented. You'll find podcasts such as myself, ERcast, which is very popular, Core EM, which teaches core emergency medicine content from a grand rounds from a residency in New York City. Things like Foamcast, FOAMCAST, which kind of takes the latest and greatest podcasts out there and then looks at the core content behind them. The number one thing I tell people to do is go to iTunes and just go to the medicine subsection and just start looking around, and you'll find plenty of emergency medicine things. And it used to be that we would only really cover like the really hot and what I call sexy topics like critical care, ultrasound, but now you're seeing a lot more core content being discussed as well. I was kind of one of the first ones to do it, but then other people are doing it as well, and I think that's great because we need more core content out there, and that's kind of what the literature has shown on this as well.
Interesting. I saw in my reading something called vodcast and something called podcast. What's the difference?
So a podcast is what we're doing right now. You're just hearing the audio. A vodcast is a video podcast. So a lot of times what this is someone will take their presentation, say a PowerPoint presentation, and then add audio narration to it. And then this will allow you to see visuals along with it as well. And what I found is that people use podcasts and vodcasts when they're doing other things, like say driving to work or exercising. other things like that. And so it allows you to turn that time into learning time. Because even if you only retain like 10% of it, it's still 10% that you didn't have before, instead of, listening to mindless music on your way to work. So that's kind of how I use it as well. I use it when I'm exercising. I use it when I'm driving to work. And it's a great way to learn on the go.
Interesting. I'm glad we're doing a podcast, not a vodcast, since we're at a coffee shop and we have people walking behind us carrying coffee mugs, etc.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, that's great. What about, another thing that came to my mind as I was preparing, what about commercial bias as well as financial barriers to subscribing to a podcast?
Sure. So most podcasts out there are actually available for free on iTunes. And the people that do those, for the vast majority, are people who are just doing it because of love of the game. They love to teach. That's pretty much why I started EM Basic as well. And they're doing it also kind of advance their professional careers. A lot of them really don't have any conflicts of interest. They're very upfront that they don't take money from drug or device companies, and I would certainly stay away from any podcast that does. A lot of the free ones you see out there on iTunes don't take any sort of money like that. Now, for example, my podcast, about a year ago, I now have a bandwidth sponsor. EB Medicine is a CME supplier in the U.S., and they provide some money to help offset some of my hosting fees. It's definitely not my path to my first $1 million, but it certainly helps. When that happened, I was very upfront with my listeners. I posted something on the website. I actually did a separate podcast to tell people that they would be sponsoring it. And at the end of each episode, I just say, EB Medicine's our bandwidth sponsor. Go visit them. You can get a discount, and here's what's new for them. But they don't have any editorial control over what I say, and they agreed to that up front. I made sure that was part of the agreement that we have. A lot of these podcasts are available for free. The biggest one that you have to pay for is called MRAP. If you are an attending and you need continuing medical education, it's about $350 a year. If you're a resident at least in the U.S., I don't know if emergency medicine residents can get access to this, but you can join what's called EMRA, the Emergency Medicine Residents Association, for about $50 a year. You can get access to EMRAP that way. And EMRAP has been around a lot longer. It's probably the longest running podcast out there. The reason they charge is because they provide that CME. Their show is very slickly produced. They have their own staff, full-time staff working on it. Certainly there are a ton of free options out there. The commercial bias really is not present, although it's something you should always look out for, just like you should look out for it in any journal article that you read.
True, that's very true. Now, some of the arguments for this type of education discuss the fact that they're up to date, and that's true. If you think about books being out of date, usually by the time they're published, how are podcasts maintained up to date?
Well, really, it's on the author of the podcast to go back and update the material. So, for example, I did a sepsis podcast about 4 years ago, and we all know that a lot has changed in sepsis care in that time. And so now I'm in the process of rewriting that episode in order to bring it up to date. So, it's something that you'll see a lot of these content producers doing in order to keep their product up to date. And certainly the other question I think you want to talk about as well is peer review. How do we peer review this? There's really two kinds: pre-publication and post-publication. So kind of go backwards. The post-publication peer review is what every podcaster has. If you put a podcast out there and people listen to it, people are going to comment, and they're going to let you know if they don't agree with what you said. And I've certainly had this happen with my podcast, and I go back and I fix it, and it's usually not that hard to edit out a section or post something on the website to say, hey, a listener wrote in and said this, and I've changed it.
Great. Just to finish up, what about the future? Where do you see this going?
Well, I see us continuing to publish more podcasts out there, especially in the areas of core content. There's always going to be those podcasts that do the latest and greatest, newest techniques, ECMO, critical care, ultrasound, but I think doing core content is equally, if not more important, and what you're seeing is a rise of a lot more podcasts that are doing core content. And so if you're talking about, say, a developing country's perspective, wouldn't it be great if you could go online and get virtually an entire curriculum through blog posts and audio podcasts for free, and not have to pay for a textbook, and have something that's up to date, fresh, and easy to listen to and easy to consume?
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Steve. This was fantastic. I appreciate you taking the time. and I hope we can post this podcast on your website.
All right, great. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.